More about the great writers, the great writers as I see them. Um, one of my heroes with debate, oratory, um, writing, journalism is the late Christopher Hitchens, who died. Boy, it's been almost a year already. December 15th of last year. Hard to believe. He was a British American author and journalist whose career spanned more than 4 decades. He was colloquially referred to as Hitch, contributed to New Statesman, The Nation, The Atlantic, The London Review of Books, Slate Magazine, Vanity Fair, The Times Literary Supplement. He was an author of 12 books and 5 collections of essays, and concentrated on the subjects of politics, literature, and religion. Later in his life, mostly religion. A prominent staple of talk shows and lecture circuits, his confrontational style of debate made him both a lauded and controversial figure. Known for his contrarian stance on a number of issues, he excoriated such public officials as Bill Clinton, Mother Teresa, and Diana, Prince of Wales. He was not afraid to give his opinion. He wasn't too much of a fan of being politically correct. Initially describing himself as a socialist, Hitchens began his break from the established political left after what he called the tepid reaction of the Western left to the Rushdie affair. The September 11th attacks exhilarated him, strengthening his international embrace of an interventionist foreign policy and his criticism of what he called the fascism with an Islamic face. His numerous editorials in support of the Iraq War caused some to label him a neocon, a neoconservative, although Hitchens insisted he was not a conservative of any kind. And his friend Ian McEwan described him as representing the anti-totalitarian left. A noted critic of religion and self-described anti-theist, he said that a person could be an atheist and wish that belief in God were correct, but that an anti-theist, a term I'm trying to get into circulation, is someone who is relieved that there is no evidence for such an assertion. According to Hitchens, the concept of God or a supreme being is a totalitarian belief that destroys individual freedom, and that free expression and scientific discovery should replace religion as a means of teaching ethics and defining human civilization. His anti-religion polemic, God is Not Great, sold over 500,000 copies, and I remember trying to read that. Very, very tough reading. When he talked and gave his speeches, he was very, very succinct and he was blessed with a very generous vocabulary, which in his books was 5 times harder to read than his speeches were very articulate, but the books were just super, for lack of a better phrase, super thickly laced with all kinds of contextual things and allusions to different kinds of philosophies and readings, and very, very tough to put everything in context, but worth it if you study it, I think, in my opinion. Hitchens died December 15th, 2011 from complications arising from esophageal cancer, a disease that he acknowledged was likely due to his lifelong predilection for heavy smoking and drinking. His death prompted tributes and eulogies from a range of public figures, including Tony Blair, Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss, Sam Harris, Martin Amis, James Fenton, and Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry is an interesting guy. So, if you ever get a chance, check out Wikipedia and this long, interesting life of, well, everybody's life is relatively short. He's lived till he was 62. He took a sharp turn to the right, though, with the Iraq War and was kind of an interesting turn to the right that he did. There's about 10 pages on Wikipedia on Christopher. Most interesting, I think, though, is his views on religion. Hitchens often spoke out against the Abrahamic religions, or what he called the three great monotheisms: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. When asked by readers of The Independent what he considered to be the axis of evil, Hitchens replied, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the three leading monotheisms. In his book, God is Not Great, Hitchens expanded his criticism to include all religions, including those rarely criticized by Western secularists, such as Hinduism and neo-paganism. His book had mixed reactions, from praise in the New York Times for his logical flourishes and conundrums to accusations of intellectual and moral shabbiness in the Financial Times. God is Not Great was nominated for a National Book Award on 10 October 2007. Hitchens contended that organized religion is the main source of hatred in the world. Violent, irrational, intolerant, allied to racism, tribalism, bigotry, invested in ignorance and hostile to free inquiry, contemptuous of women, coercive toward children. And that accordingly it ought to have a great deal on its conscience. There's Chris right there. Above all, we are all in need of a renewed enlightenment, which all base itself on the proposition that the proper study of mankind is man and women. This enlightenment would not need to depend, like its predecessors, on the heroic breakthroughs of a few gifted and exceptionally courageous people. It is within the compass of the average person. The study of literature and poetry, both for its own sake and for the eternal ethical questions with which it deals, can now easily depose the scrutiny of sacred texts that have been found to be corrupt and confected, or infected, as Chris might say. The pursuit of unfettered scientific inquiry, the availability of new findings to masses of people by electronic means, will revolutionize our concepts of research and development. Very importantly, the divorce between the sexual life and fear, and the sexual life and disease, and the sexual life and tyranny, can now at last be attempted, on the sole condition that we banish all religions from discourse. And all this and more is, for the first time in our history, within the reach, if not the grasp, of everyone. A powerful sentence, a powerful paragraph that was. His book rendered him one of the major advocates of the new atheism movement. He also was made an honorary associate of the National Secular Society. Hitchens said he would accept an invitation from any religious leader who wished to debate with him. He also served on the advisory board of the Secular Coalition for America, a lobbying group for atheists and humanists. In Washington, D.C. in 2007, Hitchens began a series of written debates on the question, is Christianity good for the world, with theologian and pastor Douglas Wilson, published in Christianity Today magazine. This exchange eventually became a book by the same title in 2008. During their book tour to promote the book, film producer Darren Doan sent a film crew to accompany them. Doan produced the film Collision, Is Christianity Good for the World, which was released in 2009. And you could check out that. I think the whole thing is available on YouTube. Collision, Is Christianity Good for the World? So, yeah, a long history, and it takes a while to digest everything. His dad was sort of a tyrannical general. His mother, sort of a kind and gentle, artistic type person, which was an interesting dichotomy there. There were many interesting reactions to Chris's death. Former Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair, said Christopher Hitchens was a complete one-off, an amazing mixture of writer, journalist, and unique character. He was fearless in the pursuit of truth in any cause in which he believed, and there was no belief he held that he did not advocate with passion, commitment, and brilliance. He was an extraordinary, compelling, colorful human being whom it was a privilege to know. Richard Dawkins, British evolutionary biologist at the University of Oxford, and a friend of Hitchens said, quote, "I think he was one of the greatest orators of all time. He was a polymath, a wit, immensely knowledgeable, and a valiant fighter against all tyrants, including imaginary supernatural ones." Sam Harris, American writer and neuroscientist, wrote, "I've been privileged to witness the gratitude that so many people feel for Hitch's life and work. For wherever I speak, I meet his fans. On my last book tour, those who attended my lectures could not contain their delight at the mere mention of his name. Many of them came up to get their books signed primarily to request that I pass along their best wishes to him. It was wonderful to see how much Hitch was loved and admired, and to be able to share this with him before the end. I will miss you, brother." That's Sam Harris. Francis Collins, director of the National Institutes of Health and former head of the Human Genome Project, who helped treat Hitchens' illness. He was also a Christian, by the way. He is a Christian. "I will miss Christopher. I will miss the brilliant turn of phrase, the good-natured banter, that is, the wry sideways smile when he was about to make a remark that would make us laugh out loud. There was that sideways smile. Yeah. No doubt he now knows the answer to the question of whether there's more to the spirit than just atoms and molecules. I hope he was surprised by the answer. I hope to hear him tell it someday. The story. He will tell it really well." That's kind of inspiring. The American Catholic columnist Ross Doyet, noting the affection felt by intellectually minded Christians for Hitchens, observed in the world of journalism among his peers and competitors and sparring partners, it was nearly impossible to find a religious person who did not have a soft spot for a man who famously accused faith of poisoning absolutely everything. That is a tremendous statement when you think about that. That's respect, even though they didn't understand him, but they respected him. British columnist and author Peter Hitchens, who had a tumultuous relationship with his older brother Christopher, wrote he and Christopher got on surprisingly well in the past few months, better than about 50 years as it happened, and praised his brother as courageous. Irish-American political journalist Alexander Cockburn, founder of the left-wing political magazine Counterpunch, wrote an obituary critical of Hitchens, criticizing his support for the Iraq War, criticisms of Mother Teresa, criticisms of their mutual friend Edward Said, and concluded, "I found the Hitchens cult of recent years entirely mystifying. He endured his final ordeal with pluck, sustained indomitably by his wife Carol." So one of the more negative portrayals, Alexander Cockburn, who was a quite brilliant guy himself, but misguided. Tributes followed from the philosopher Daniel Dennett, the physicist Lawrence Krauss, the actor Stephen Fry, actor Sean Penn, writer Ian McEwan, philosopher A.C. Grayling, and Vanity Fair, in which he was remembered as an incomparable critic and masterful speaker. October 9th, 2012, Hitchens was posthumously given the John Lennon Peace Prize, accepted by his wife Carol Blue. And we'll have to find this movie called Collision on YouTube. It's available. These are the debates with Douglas Wilson, who looks kind of like the late Andrew Breitbart too. Kind of interesting there. So there it is. A very interesting life, and just what I touched upon was just the scratching the surface of. So I would definitely recommend the book God Is Not Great, or many of his other ones. His tribute to George Orwell is perhaps the best one, I think, so far. So R.I.P. Chris Hitchens, you were fascinating, and I continue to be fascinated about what you did and what you stood for.